You join me today at the beautiful Staunton Harold Reservoir. It's a gorgeous venue controlled by Burton Mutual AA. The work that Roy Sutton, Shane Hodgkinson and Richard the Saw do on the bank here to make a great venue, it's beyond belief. Look how stunning it is. So we've just come today to run a few things through. We're going to feed a fish today, and I just want to fish short and catch small fish and get my rigs right when fishing with braid and small feeders. I just want to become more efficient at catching these roach and small skimmers. So I'm here on peg 69. It's a nice depth at 30 odd metres, and I'm just going to fish away and see what happens. So join me, Mick Vials, in this session. So for the session today, as I spoke about earlier, we could be fishing more than one line for more than one species. So I think it's quite important to make your bait relevant to that, and so therefore I'm looking for an all-round mix, one that would catch roach, skimmers, bream wouldn't be put off by it, and an odd hybrid. So for that I'm using what I call an unoffensive mix, which happens to be 2 parts of F1 dark, and I'm just using a pint measure to measure that off, nice and rough. I'm not on a cookery class, so it doesn't have to be exact. It will rise accordingly. And then 1 part Thatcher's. That's the Thatcher's original. And to that, I'll add 1 part water. So I like to just give that a good whisk. I prefer a drill because it does make a better even mix. That 1 part water, 3 parts ground bait. I'll just let that soak in while I'm preparing the rest of my kit. Maybe it'll need a little touch up with a touch of water, and that's a great all-round mix. With that, my particles, basically my feed, it's very simple. I've got maggots, a few live and some dead in water just to keep them nice and fresh. I've got the obligatory red worm, beautiful, dendrobenas, plentiful, and a pint of casters. I always have on my side tray a few micros. If I'm getting trouble with my perch, that just seems to stave them off and keeps them at bay. And then the same applies with that corn. If I'm getting bitted out and I want to try and put a bit bigger particles in to attract maybe some bream or some bigger roach, and I'll just have those on my side tray just in case. So we've got set up and we're ready to fish. I'm going to start at 34 metres where I've got a count of 3, and we're going to target small fish and hopefully build a peg and try and increase the stamp of fish. There's a lot of very small roach in here, but there are some stampers, there's some better skimmers. If we can get those, that'd be fantastic. I'm starting on a big, basic, simple setup, a running rig. I've got the small, smooth hound cage feeder on, with a 60 centimetre hook length. I've started with a small piece of worm just to target those smaller fish. As I said, it's a count of 3 there, which I reckon is about 8 foot, just deep enough to give the fish enough depth and comfort while we disturb them and they're flashing as we catch them. It's a nice wind which has turned lovely into his face, and that should give us the cover we need. And that's a bite, that's a proper bite. Feels like a slightly better roach. You'd hope to catch fish 3 to 4 ounces. There's a lot of 1.5 fish in this venue. Should have known, it's a perch. It's a good start. We'll take him, but it's not the target quarry. I mean, 30 pounder perch is as good as 30 pounder roach, but they're not as sustainable to catch all day as roach and skimmers. So, as I said, 34 metres, nice and comfortable. And what my plan there is that when I fished recently, the fish don't want to be in that depth. And that's a bite straight away. And that leaves me enough room if the fish back off, because the water is very, very clear here at Staunton. If the fish back off, I can follow them out. And when I plumbed up at 42 metres, that drops off to a count of 4, approximately 10 foot. So we've got the option to move further out. And what we've found here in the past is that sometimes the better skimmers just hang off the back of the shoal, so quite busy, lots of roach, perch, small hybrids on this line, which are great weight builders. You know, you can fish for 2-3 hours on that, building a weight, but then you might find that those skimmers just sit off the back of that. Well, let's see how that develops. So, we're getting a few bites, and look at that, I've just missed the net with that one. But the wind has just got up a little bit. And I realised that I was missing a few bites. So what I've actually done is just up my feeder. So we started on a 5 square, I've dropped down to a 4 square, and that was a 20 gram smooth hound. So what I've actually done is moved up to a 25, because what had actually happened is, due to the wind, when I'm hitting my clip, it wasn't straightening my braid out. So I'd got lots of braid kind of floating and a bit of slack, a bit of we call it a bow. And because I'd got that, I wasn't direct onto my fish. And when you're fishing for small fish and getting regular bites like that, you need to be direct. So this slightly heavier feeder just hits the clip a little bit harder. It keeps your line, or your braid in this instance, tight while it's sinking, and just allows you to be a little bit more direct onto your fish. And typically it's not gone straight round, so it's just made me out as a little liar. But that's fishing. There you go. Quite small fish today, but I think as the session progresses, these will probably improve in stamp. You know, these are the like sort of 2 ounce fish, which, don't get me wrong, you know, you can catch 20 pound of, catching them at this speed and this depth at this distance. But to reach 30 pound, you're going to need a slightly better stamp of fish, and that heavier feeder is 100% better. So we're getting a bite of chuck, and as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, fished this reservoir recently in the Sauna Bay Super League, and of course that was a team match. And I'm kind of recreating today what I did that day. And you're approaching a team match is completely different to what it would be in an open match or a pleasure session. You know, this is quite hard work, and some people wouldn't call it pleasure. Personally, I think it's great, it's good practice. It allows us to learn about his tackle and his rods and speed and how many fish we can catch. But if I put the scenario in that we're going to be fishing in an open match, and it's based on the highest weight over 60 anglers as opposed to section points in a team match, the approach would be completely different, because I could take these fish all day, and as I've mentioned before, you'd probably reach 20 pound like this, but that probably wouldn't be enough to win the match in an open match scenario. I think that one took it on the way down. So you'd probably have a different setup really. So what you'd be more inclined to do is have a longer line in deeper water. Remember, this is 7.5 to 8 foot where I'm fishing. We can reach 10 foot quite easily at 45 metres. But 70 metres here, you could probably drop into 12 to 15 foot. And I think you'd probably find the bigger fish, the bream. But of course, what we're talking about is risk and gambling in a match. Do you want to go for the team approach with a guaranteed £20? or do you take the gamble and fish for 40? Trouble with that is that if you don't catch them, you come back with 8 to 10 pound. Because you can't wind a lot of small fish in from 70 metres. Your bites aren't as efficient, you're not as efficient, and you'll see, just while I've been talking, we've had a fish a chuck, and they're weight builders, and a bit more guaranteed, as they're called. It's an interesting decision, and one that you have to make for yourself. Here's a little one. So that's quite an interesting point, that's a very small fish. And one of the main reasons that I actually came to Staunton today was that one of the hardest methods to master is big weights of small fish. And getting your rig right, getting your rod right, your main line. Hooks are really important. So today I just want to go through a few things. I'm using 010 braid. I'm using a very, very soft tip on this 11'6" rod. And I've just dropped to a smaller hook. I started on a 14 series 18 Tilbertini. And that were great, but then I started to miss a few bites, so I've just dropped down a size to a 15, and that seems to be a little bit better. And I think it's important with your fishing to spend days like today just finding out those wrinkles that you're looking for and finding out what works best for you. As I said, you know, are you comfortable with braid or would you prefer nylon? I think this is a braid venue. This type of fishing's, you know, perfect for braid. Very, very soft tips. I've become a little bit more akin to fishing soft tips recently. And I just think that you get a better bite to hooking ratio. That's really important. And then feeders. You know, people look at my feeder box and say, why so many feeders? But I think if you try and look at normal, you know, float fishing, pole fishing, or, you know, waggler fishing, you're in control of how you feed your bait, because you can either loose feed it, or you can, if you're fishing ground bait, you can squeeze it into a ball, and you can squeeze that hard, you can squeeze it soft, you can wet it up, make a cloud. Well, with feeder fishing, you're relying on your actual feeder to do that. So I almost, you know, sort of describe a feeder as a casket that allows you to present your bait to the bottom. And it's like, how hard do you squeeze? Are you just squeeze? Do you not squeeze? Personally, I don't like squeezing my ground bait too hard. So with me, I like a wet ground bait. So sometimes I have to use a different feeder, and I'm using a cage at the minute, smooth hound 25 gram in a mini. But I'll probably, if I need to get the fish down on the deck because they're becoming a bit frantic up at the top, which I missed a few bites, that's probably why. Because when you're thrashing in and out all the time, you get your peg a little bit busy. What I'll probably do, and I'm just going to pick one up out of this box, is just switch to a small window. Now, a window feeder, as the name suggests, is a solid plastic frame or casket, as I've just described, with a little window in it. And what that actually does for me, because I'm not a squeezer, that keeps me bait wrapped up until it gets to the bottom, which allows me to feed the same dampness of ground bait without spreading it in the sub levels, and focuses the fish back on the bottom. And days like today are perfect for practicing that and perfecting that. We've got the Preston Feeder Masters final coming up in 2 weeks rather, and that could be a fish race, small fish, and the name of that game will be efficiency, i.e. coming back with a fish every time, not missing bites like I'm doing at the minute. Good job I came practicing really, and preparing for that. And today will be an ideal session for that, getting it right. So one of the true signs of a fantastic fishery that's healthy and full of fish, and I mean Staunton is absolutely full of fish, you do get an odd predator, and they're always very healthy, like all the fish in here, and they pull a bit hard, and this one might make it to the net. So we've had a few issues. I was catching at 34 metres and had a few pike hanging around there, and I think being on my own, i.e. not in a match, I'm attracting all the local resident pike into my swims. So I've gone to 50 metres to try and change lines and catch a few better fish and hopefully avoid a few of these chaps, and they've followed me out to there as well. But hey ho, they're all God's creatures and they're all beautiful in their own way. Wish I'd set up that one's in the bag for you, look. Handsome creatures. Just don't get your fingers too close. And that one's hooked in the scissors. Watch your fingers. It's very lively, strong fish. There's the hook. Try and return him nice and safe. He's a beauty. Go on, big lad. Well, it just goes to show what small changes can bring. So I've just started putting a few pellets and some corn in on that longer line. And I think 15 minutes in, I've gone from catching a roach last choke to catching a bream. And I did say this morning that we might actually catch one while we were fishing for small fish. And there he is, an old warrior. Let's see if he's got any mates. It looks like that change has definitely paid off. That's a skimmer. Healthy young skimmer, knocking up for a pound. Ever so lively. And a welcome sight. So that feeding that pellet and that corn has definitely paid off. Beautiful. So another skimmer. That deeper water at 50 metres, it's about 10, 12 foot there. It just gives that extra depth. I think just gives a little bit more water over the fish's heads, and fish like that are just more comfortable to sit in that depth. Small piece of worm. I'm feeding with that's actually a medium Zipper riser cage, so that I can pack plenty of pellet and corn and a bit less ground bait, which is just staving off the roach and giving enough static baits. You know, the corn and the pellets are, as opposed to worms, I've cut the worms out altogether, and that's just allowing us through a few small fish. Having said that, looks like a roach has attacked the way down, but let's hope it's not hooked itself. And you can tell there's a few skimmers in peg because your tip's a lot quieter. You know, you can actually go in without it rattling off a roach and pick off them better fish. So I've just dropped down to this 30 gram mini Zipper because I felt like the big feeder that we're using to feed lots of bait wasn't probably quiet enough and stealthy enough. So just dropping down, because I felt there was plenty of corn and pellets in there, just dropping down to that smaller feeder, I just sneaked up on that fine beauty, because it just goes in a little bit quieter, a little bit more subtle. A lot of people catch fish on a bomb chucking over their bed of feed on Staunton, and I've had that in my mind, which is why I sometimes clip that window feeder on. But fishing out there and still wanted to feed a little bit of bait, I had that one on three dead reds as well, which I think is just enough to put the small roach off. You'll notice I put 2 on through the thick end and 1 through the thin, which just leaves more hook exposed. But this 30 gram mini zippler allows me to feed a little bit, draw an odd fish down with the stuff coming off it, but it's quiet enough to fish neat. Lovely. So we've had a really interesting day at Staunton, and it just goes to prove that things don't always go to plan. The main aim of my practice session today really was to recreate what happened on the Super League a few weeks ago, where I caught 30 pound of mixed fish, 1 bream and some roach and skimmers, 35 metres. I started on that line today, found that depth, 3-second count, and I was catching roach, but they were really, really small, and you know, I did think the peg would progress, but I had some interference from pike, so that just kind of persuaded me to fish further 50 metres. I went onto this longer rod and fed a bit more aggressively, corn and pellets, to try and catch some bigger fish that wouldn't have got bothered by pike. And basically, I've caught a few skimmers, and then I've had 3 or 4 bream, which has just been great. And it just goes to prove that you need to change things up, swap what you're doing, think about the swim, and results will come accordingly. But it's been a great day, and we'll have a look at these fish before we put them back.